With top Democratic lawmakers boycotting AIPAC's conference this year, is the power of the pro-Israel lobby in the United States beginning to fade? Hello and welcome to Bigger Than Five with me, Rida Fakhri. This week, the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, held its 50th annual conference here in Washington. The group, which describes itself as America's pro-Israel lobby, announced that more than two-thirds of members of Congress were attending this year's gathering. All the top Democratic presidential candidates, however, decided to stay away. But despite these rising tensions, AIPAC's deep influence on Washington's political scene was on display once again, with lawmakers pledging their allegiance to the U.S.-Israel alliance, an alliance that has been a traditional pillar of American foreign policy.
I am deeply honored to be the first sitting president ever to address this conference.
America and Israel have a special friendship.
I want to thank you for helping to make the partnership between the United States and Israel what it is today.
The work that AIPAC does is a vital part of our democratic process.
In the United States, our support for Israel is bipartisan, and that is how it should stay.
There is no daylight between America and our most reliable ally, the State of Israel.
America stands with Israel.
At every crucial juncture, at every fork in the road, we have been there for Israel every single time.
And if we face the future side by side, I know for both Israel and America, our best days are still ahead.
I'm a newcomer to politics, but not to backing the Jewish state.
One of AIPAC's strong supporters on Capitol Hill is Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick. He's a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and was at this year's conference. I sat down with him and asked him why U.S. lawmakers elected to represent and defend the interests of the United States would engage with a group that lobbies on behalf of a foreign government.
They are a voice out there. A lot of people that are associated with them are friends of mine from back in the district. Their main point, as I see it, is to educate members of Congress on their perspective of U.S.-Israel relationships.
But many would go further and would say, in fact, they don't educate members of Congress as much as they pressure members of Congress to toe the line and to follow their own legislative agenda. AIPAC, as you well know, has been accused of influencing lawmakers here on Capitol Hill through campaign donations. Is that a fair accusation?
No. It's not.
Why not?
Well, I can tell you, lobbyists, whether it be the pharmaceutical industry, the labor unions, any of these organizations, they are hired by groups of organizations to advocate on behalf of an issue. Now, from my standpoint, they are an educational body, just like every single lobbying organization is out there. It's up to the members of Congress on how much they allow that to influence them.
And how much do they allow that to influence them? How much of your support for AIPAC has to do with the money you have received from the pro-Israel lobby?
None.
You say none, but according to the Open Secrets database, you received, in fact, $54,979 in pro-Israel donations, and that is just for the 2018 election cycle. Can you deny that?
There was $30 million spent in our race in 2018. $30 million all told. Isn't that ridiculous, by the way, for one district? But I will tell you, there are financial contributions from a whole host of organizations and individuals. But the most important thing is, when it comes down to votes, can you defend your vote based on what you believe? That's really the test.
But Congressman, the question is, did you receive $54,979
I have no idea what
in pro-Israel donations? And surely AIPAC expects something in return.
Well, I don't know what the number is. I take it your word if that's what it is.
But it's not my word. It's according to the Open Secrets database.
Sure. Yeah, I don't dispute that. I've never calculated, nor would I. We have friends and supporters from across the spectrum. I spend a lot of time in mosques as well with my friends and supporters across the district.
But surely you don't receive money from them. Should members of Congress accept money from a group that lobbies on behalf of a foreign government?
Well, that gets into the broader campaign finance question. I think money in politics is a huge problem. But the issue from an electoral standpoint is, does any member of Congress allow any donation from any individual, any organization to impact what they do?
And how do we know that they don't? I mean, doesn't this money somehow make congressmen, including perhaps yourself, beholden to the lobbyist positions when it comes to the Middle East region, particularly to Israel and anything that Israel is concerned with?
I can answer for myself. No, it has no impact whatsoever.
Let me ask you then very quickly where you stand on these issues that AIPAC lobbies very hard for. Very quickly, were you in favor of moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, yes or no?
Yes.
You were. Were you in favor of withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal?
Yes.
And just recently, President Trump decided to fully recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan, which is internationally recognized as territory occupied by Israel. I suppose that there too you agree with him and with AIPAC.
I actually answered that question today. I don't agree with the process. I will tell you that. You know, I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee. We should have been consulted on that. The Senate Foreign Affairs Committee should have been consulted on that. It's a whole separate question of whether or not that makes sense. My concern with that is that if it in any way impedes the peace process, which many think it will, I think those are decisions that have to be entered into much more carefully.
You were one of 51 congressmen, I believe, to make a trip to Israel, organized by AIPAC. At the time, you said you were left in awe and that it was one of the most educational trips you ever made. You said, quote, "It's our responsibility to have a firm understanding of everything that goes on in the Middle East." I just wonder to what extent a trip like this gives you that firm understanding of everything that's going on in the Middle East, not just a one-sided understanding.
Well, one of the things that I've credited them for on that trip, and me and Josh Gottheimer were both on that trip, he's my Democrat colleague from New Jersey, was that they did go out of their way to provide a balanced perspective. Like I said, we met with representatives from the PA there. We got to pose that question. That was obviously a question we had, whether they could give us assurances that funding that was being sent was not going to these causes.
But what did you learn about their suffering? Because it seems to have been that the whole focus of the trip was more to listen to what Israel's concerns were. And you came back talking about the, quote, existential threat that Iran poses to Israel once you came back.
There's no question about that.
Did you learn anything about the Palestinians' concerns on that?
Sure, we met with the Palestinian Authority. That was part of the
trip.
trip.
Did you learn anything about their concerns?
Absolutely.
Did you see the occupation, appreciate what it means?
Well, we talked to them. I don't know, nobody saw any occupation, but it was more of a trip to meet the representatives from the coalition government. We met with the Palestinian Authority. We got to spend time in Bethlehem, in Golan Heights.
You were in the occupied West Bank, and you say you're not sure that you saw any of the occupation.
No, we didn't.
How can that be? I mean, you were in occupied land in the West Bank.
Right,
You
but when
didn't
you
see the
say
occupation?
seeing occupation, I mean, as far as camps and things like that, we didn't see any of that, no.
Right, but you saw the military presence of Israel and you know
Sure.
about the occupation.
Sure.
Did it leave you with any kind of understanding for what the Palestinians are going through? Because it seems to me that the agenda, AIPAC's agenda, seems to be focusing solely on what the Netanyahu government wants, which is Iran and nothing else.
No, and that's a fair point to bring up. I think, again, any representative, I mean, it's our job, you know, when we go and we talk to anybody, you know, oftentimes people have an angle, right? It's our job to sift through that, to learn and extract the information that we need to set policy, but always understand if somebody's advocating from a certain perspective, for a certain reason, that all factors in.
And while Donald Trump and his Republican Party continues to provide Israel with unconditional support, there is a growing divide among Americans over this relationship. A study released last year showed that while 79% of Republicans sympathize with Israel, only 27% of Democrats hold that view. That's the largest divide between the two parties since this kind of polling began in the late 1970s. Ariel Gold, Code Pink's national co-director and member of the Union for Reform Judaism, tells us why AIPAC does not represent Jewish Americans like her.
As an American Jew, I would like to see AIPAC dissolve, honestly. I don't think AIPAC has a use in our system. AIPAC's views and the directions that AIPAC guides American policy are terrible for the American people. It encourages us to put the interests of a foreign government that carries out a brutal, brutal occupation before the needs of American citizens here at home, before things such as infrastructure and healthcare, schools, things that we're in dire need of here in the US. What AIPAC does is they demand unconditional US diplomatic and financial support for Israel. That includes even supporting Israel's illegal settlement enterprise. and they demand continuing increases in military aid to Israel, already at $3.8 billion a year. I don't want the crimes of occupation and apartheid to be committed in my name or my children's name as a Jewish woman. And I feel that the best way that I can have an impact to stop the crimes that the State of Israel is committing is by ending U.S. support for Israel. And so much of the center of that is at AIPAC.
So is there a growing generation gap when it comes to AIPAC's influence in Washington and the U.S.'s unwavering support for Israeli policies, as Ariel Gold thinks? Tom Dine was AIPAC's executive director for 13 years between 1980 and 1993. He was once considered one of the most powerful lobbyists in Washington. Under his leadership, AIPAC's membership grew from 10,000 to 55,000, and the U.S.'s $3 billion in annual foreign aid to Israel went from being loans to becoming grants. Tom Dine, you were instrumental in transforming AIPAC. When you hear the views of young Jewish Americans like Ariel Gold, who says that she not only does not want to be associated with AIPAC, in fact would like to see AIPAC dissolved, what goes through your mind? Is this one of those moments that show us that AIPAC is no longer the powerhouse it used to be?
No, it's about free expression. And while I didn't like what she said because it was so unfactual, she has every right in the world to say it.
But what was so unfactual? She said that that AIPAC does the bidding of a foreign government. Was that unfactual?
That is totally not true. The first word in the spelled out AIPAC is American. It's an American organization that very definitely tries to understand not just America, but Israel.
But hold on, AIPAC itself calls itself America's pro-Israel lobby.
That's right. That's what it is. It's an American organization. It's not an Israeli organization.
But can you deny that it does the bidding of the Israeli government?
Yes,
that in fact,
I can.
How can
because that would be illegal, number one. The Foreign Agents Registration Act forbids that, or you sign up as a foreign agent. After all, that's what part of the Trump investigation is about.
Okay, but how much of AIPAC's problem with the left, with liberal Democrats now shunning AIPAC, and clearly we saw this through top Democrats deciding to boycott AIPAC's annual gathering. How much of it has to do with the fact that AIPAC has given the Likud government of Benjamin Netanyahu such a tight embrace that it's left many people out?
Look, even when I ran AIPAC, Shimon Peres was the prime minister twice, 2 different times. And he was a favorite here in America and among American Jewry and Americans not of Jewish faith. And no one said that then. If you don't like Likud foreign policy, say it. That's okay.
But do you think there is a conflict of interest for Congress members to be taking money from a lobby group like AIPAC, not directly, because it doesn't do so directly.
Exactly, let's get that correct.
We know that AIPAC directs its fund indirectly to members of Congress, and that has been widely documented through what is called PACs, Political Action Committees. And you were, in fact, one of the key people who strategized in order to expand its influence.
That is legal. Again, AIPAC members can do whatever they want, but AIPAC itself doesn't touch political money.
Beyond the financial aspect of how AIPAC influences U.S. policy, and we know there's a whole...
It does influence U.S.
So you do agree it does?
Oh, definitely. So do other lobbies. There are 23,000 lobbies in Washington, D.C.
So let me ask you how much coordination, political coordination, there is between AIPAC and the Israeli government. After all, you were a key insider.
Okay. And there were times when I spoke up about a different orientation, a different policy. You know, when I had to deal directly with...
So are you saying that, yes, there was a lot of coordination between the two?
No, I'm saying I wanted to show you that there isn't, nobody's in anybody's hip pocket. You know, I crossed Begin. I was in favor of the Reagan peace effort. And Begin wasn't, nor was King Hussein of Jordan, nor was Yasser Arafat. But I spoke out on behalf of that program.
But how do you then explain that the man who, in fact, pushed you out of AIPAC when you had to leave AIPAC back in 1993, someone by the name of Steve Rosen.
He didn't push me out.
But that's not the key issue that I wanted to get to. He was indicted. He was indicted, Mr.
Yes, he
Dine,
was.
in 2005 under the Espionage Act, along with another AIPAC colleague, for passing classified information to Israeli government officials. How much of an arm of the Israeli government then is AIPAC?
Is it an influential group? Is it a group that represents others in the United States? And again, I said earlier, 535 congressional districts, and every district has pro-Israel people in it, of the Jewish faith. The evangelicals are bigger than ever involved in pro-Israel activity, and your next door neighbor. Israel, as long as Israel is always seen favorably in polling, it's dropped in the most recent weeks, it's going to go up again, and it hovers around 60%.
You mentioned the evangelicals, and I know it was your strategy back when you were in charge of AIPAC to expand the base
yes.
of AIPAC's membership to include the evangelicals who have this affinity
yes.
with Israel
yes.
for theological reasons. How much of a backbone are they today for AIPAC?
Israel has more than majority support in the country. And you can't run a foreign policy, you can't influence a foreign policy by 3% of the population. So when I reached out to the evangelical community to bring them inside the political tent, I knew what I was doing statistically.
And that proved to be the right strategy. But the unconditional support for Israel, which was once sacrosanct in American politics, seems to not be the case anymore. Is it a one-off, what we're seeing today, or do you think the momentum really is shifting?
Let me just bring you up to date, or go back in history. There was a time when Republicans didn't support Israel. When Harry Truman recognized the new nation state of Israel, the Republicans were opposed to that. So things change.
But could you see the day when top Democrats would shun AIPAC?
Well, Steny Hoyer was there. He's a top Democrat.
He's not a presidential contender, though.
Well, that doesn't make you a top Democrat either. Sure. It makes you a presidential contender.
But it used to make or break your presidential aspirations to show support for AIPAC
certainly,
or not.
You know, that's okay. It's healthy. If people don't want to attend, that's up to them.
Tom Dine, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
AIPAC's impact and political clout has grown steadily since its establishment in the mid-1950s, with the lobby securing massive weapons sales and U.S. assistance to Israel in the 1960s. Since the 1980s, AIPAC has widened its support base to include Christian evangelicals. Although not entirely unified on all policy decisions, the lobby has managed to influence U.S. decision-making in significant ways. So how then did AIPAC become such a well-funded and powerful political force? Aus Haidari breaks it down in our 5 facts.
AIPAC is the oldest pro-Israel lobby in the U.S. Originally called the American Zionist Committee for Public Affairs, AIPAC was founded in 1951 by Isaiah Keenan, who was a registered Israeli foreign agent. Their main goal was to secure weapons and financial assistance to the newly formed State of Israel. The name was later changed so that it can be registered in the U.S. as a tax-exempt social welfare group, which allowed AIPAC not to disclose information about the sources of their funding. AIPAC is part of a large pro-Israel network in the U.S. Today, AIPAC is part of a much wider network of pro-Israel lobby groups working to achieve bipartisan U.S. support for the State of Israel by making contributions to Israel-friendly lawmakers. Millions generated by AIPAC annually. By its own admission, AIPAC has 100,000 members. Through various different donations and club membership fees that range from $60 to $100,000 a year, AIPAC generates millions. According to the group's most recent public tax records, they received more than $96 million in 2017. Pro-Israel groups engage in political fundraising. Officially, it is illegal for AIPAC to engage in political fundraising, but that's just a technicality. Fundraising is a huge part of the group's operation. In the 2018 midterm elections, more than $14.9 million was raised by pro-Israel groups for candidates. That's their third biggest contribution ever. Out of 435 members of the House of Representatives, 269 received pro-Israel lobby contributions at an average of more than $23,000 per representative. And out of 100 U.S. senators, 58 accepted contributions at an average of more than $77,000 per senator. AIPAC pushes for laws in Congress. Each year, AIPAC and other pro-Israel lobby groups put their weight behind a number of legislations, especially when they are anti-Iran, anti-Palestine, and of course, pro-Israel. These legislations include moving the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, cutting aid to Palestinians, and countering the BDS movement. The group also lobbied heavily against the Obama-era Iran deal, which President Donald Trump withdrew from in 2018.
For more on the impact of AIPAC's influence on U.S. foreign policy, especially in the Middle East, we're joined by Omar Badar, Deputy Director of the Arab American Institute, and Alex Titus, Policy Advisor at America First Policies. Alex Titus, you recently wrote a piece in support of Trump's recognition of Israel's sovereignty over the Golan. Putting aside the legal aspect of this, politically speaking, why was Trump doing this now?
So Trump was doing this now because he was just recognizing a reality that everyone in the U.S. has known for a while. After the war of '67, Israel has controlled the Golan Heights. They were never going to give back control to Syria, who initiated a war of aggression against Israel and would bomb Israel kibbutzim. They would kill farmers, they would kill workers, and Israel fought a bloody battle to be able to take the Golan Heights. And I think everyone in D.C. recognizes that Israel was never going to give that back.
It's well documented that Israel wasn't fighting a war of self-defense. I mean, that's well documented. So the question is, why was he giving yet again another free gift to the Netanyahu government?
Well, I don't think this was a gift to just the Netanyahu government. I mean, most of the candidates right now who are campaigning in Israel also agree with the Trump position, including the Blue and White Party, who's, of course, Netanyahu's main rival. I mean, I think that the politics in Israel have shifted to understand that this is just something that's a de facto reality. Israel was never going to give back the Golan Heights. Trump was the only one who was willing to actually go out there and basically pull the guys off of this and say that this is Israel's land and that Israel needs it for its own defense.
Omar Badar, Netanyahu called Trump's decision historic justice. How damaging is Trump's disregard for international law to the U.S.'s standing around the world and its reputation?
Yeah, there's no question that it's incredibly damaging. I mean, there is no question that Israel would not give up those territories on their own. But nevertheless, international law is very clear about the fact that the acquisition of territory by force is completely illegal, and that's why the United Nations repeatedly called on Israel to end the occupation of the territories that they captured in the 1967 war. That is a war that Israel started, let's be clear about. The first shot that was fired in '67 was an Israeli assault on Egypt. But ultimately, this is about the dynamic between the United States and Israel. Are we going to enable their violations of international law? Are we going to enable their acquisition of territory from their neighbors? And by the way, that contributes to regional instability in a very obvious way. You're only going to settle the conflict is that if Israel starts behaving within the law like its other neighbors, and we're doing the exact opposite.
AIPAC itself, I mean, boasts about its incredible influence, that it's able to lobby on behalf of Israel. I mean, doesn't lobbying always involve money influencing politics? I mean,
well, of course, but
obvious.
I mean, every group in D.C. has the right to be able to lobby and have their interests be heard. And I just think it's ridiculous that some people think that because AIPAC sets up little PACs and they write a $2,000 check to a candidate that they've somehow completely able to control them. And again, I think that feeds into that narrative of the Jewish person as some sort of puppet master being able to pull the strings, which is something that we've seen throughout history.
I think
you say that it's a manufactured crisis.
Look, an AIPAC is an organization that is widely considered by members of Congress themselves to be one of the most influential organizations that are affecting policy in Washington. In fact, a former high-ranking official within AIPAC itself, Stephen Rosen, told a pro-Israel journalist, Jeffrey Goldberg, when they were sitting together in a restaurant, he pulled out a napkin and said, within 24 hours, AIPAC can have the signatures of 70 senators on this piece of paper on just a random napkin. So when you have a lobby that is bragging about its own ability to influence and get its way in Washington, and you have members of Congress echoing that sentiment, then it's completely absurd to pretend that AIPAC doesn't have that kind of influence. And we know for a fact that they use money in politics like every other major lobby operates in Washington. And that's precisely what Ilhan Omar was calling out, is that we have to recognize that these policies are incredibly destructive to any prospect for peace in the Middle East because they are enabling Israel's atrocious policies towards the Palestinians. We know we're seeing the demolition of homes, the shooting of journalists and children, and robbing people of their land and water resources. And this kind of thing is no person of conscience should support them, which is why we're beginning to see that backlash against AIPAC.
Alex Titus, do you believe that the backlash has to do with this, that a lot of members of Congress, a lot of Democrats are just simply getting fed up with AIPAC's ways?
I don't think that a lot of Democrats are getting fed up. I mean, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, who I think have been the two most outspoken members of AIPAC, both represent very, very, very blue districts, which have a high number of Democrats compared to your average Republican or sort of middle of the line or Democratic district. So by no means do they speak for the broader sort of Democratic Party, and I actually think they've played their influence well in sort of upping the ante and pretending that like they actually speak for the broader Democratic Party, which I think is generally pretty much in line with sort of the two-state solution, some of the policies that AIPAC are pushing forward. I'm sure they have some sort of disagreements, but I just think it's ridiculous to make the notion that somehow AIPAC and is just scheming to be able to have everyone sort of on the same page of this issue.
Alex Titus, Omar Badar, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
So while AIPAC continues to exert considerable influence on the US government, it may no longer be the much feared lobby it once was. An important taboo has been broken, with more and more people now seeing AIPAC as a lobby group that furthers Israel's interests rather than the United States. But for now, with Trump in the White House, American foreign policy has aligned itself like never before, not only with Israel, but with its Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. From me, Rida Fakhri, and the entire team here in Washington, thanks for watching. See you next week.